Learn today about our IELTS speaking section. We'll review different strategies and tips and how to complete this section, and we'll learn about part 1, 2, and 3. And before learning about each part of the IELTS speaking test, we're going to have a brief overview. So in your part 1, you are going to have general questions about yourself and everyday situations. So you'll have everyday vocabulary that you can use at home, at supermarket, at school, and so on. And also you'll be using different tenses, verb tenses, that you apply in your daily life. Your part 2 is going to be about a speak on a topic given by the examiner. So this is a very important part of the test because you'll get to show your ability of speaking English for a longer period of time. You need to introduce your talk, you need to pay attention to question words, and also you should be able to express your personal feelings. And the final part 3 is going to be about a conversation on abstract topics, where you have to do the same to introduce your topic and support your topic with supporting details and make some clarifications if you have to. So this is our brief overview to the IELTS speaking test. And in the following slides, we will be learning about part 1. And now we're going to discuss our part 1, which is going to be about everyday vocabulary words. Remember, when you're completing this type of task, it is very important for you to know vocabulary about daily topics that will help you to talk about yourself and everyday situations such as work, study, hometown, favorite food, hobbies, your favorite pets, so things like that. You have to make sure you are familiar with these topics and you know what kind of words to use when you talk about them. Important things to remember here also, not giving short answers. So make sure you do not answer with yes, no, I don't know type of responses, because at this point your examiner won't be able to see how much you can speak in English and how well you can speak English. So make sure you know these topics and your response is at least 2-3 sentences long. And remember, it's very important not to memorize your answers, because sometimes when students memorize the answers, they don't sound natural. So this is one of the biggest mistakes. Even though sometimes you make grammatical mistakes, it's totally fine. The most important point when you are completing your part 1 to be natural and be able to talk about general topics about everyday life. And now we are going to talk about verb tenses and their importance in the speaking test. Remember, you need to pay close attention to the verb tense that the examiner uses. Also listen for the tense markers in the examiner's question, because this will help you determine in which tense you need to speak. There are some common tense markers we have on the slide, and the first one we see about present tense. When you hear the words now, at this moment, presently, these days, usually, and questions beginning with do and does, that means you need to speak in the present tense. If you hear the following words such as in the past, when you were younger, when you were a child, before, or question beginning with did, that means you need to speak in the past tense. And the next one is the future. And if you have to speak in the future, you need to pay attention to the words such as in the future, in a few years, later, or questions beginning with will, and are you going to. So pay close attention to these tense markers and always listen carefully how the question begins when the examiner speaks. This will help you determine in which tense you need to talk. Here you have part 1 example prompt. In your part 1, your examiner is going to ask you about yourself and the things you like to do daily. So the questions can be about your daily life, such as your hobbies, your favorite subject, about your family. You never know what is going to be on the test, but these are common topics you need to be prepared for. So your examiner, he or she might announce a topic. So for example, he or she might say, let's talk about your hometown or village. And then he or she can ask you follow-up questions about town or village. For example, they can ask you, what kind of place is it? What's the most interesting part of the town or village where you live? What kind of jobs do the people in your town village do? And would you say it's a good place to live and why? So examiner can ask you different questions about 2 or 3 topics. More question he or she asks you, it means you are not probably talking enough and your responses are short. So make sure when you're answering, you are not having responses with yes or no question like answers. So try not to respond with yes, no, I don't know, or maybe. So make sure your responses are complete and you have at least 2-3 sentences. So that's all we have for the part 1. In the prompt you see, it's an actual prompt from the authentic Ielts test. So you need to be prepared to talk about everyday vocabulary, everyday activities, and of course about yourself. IELTS Speaking Strategies and Tips, Part 2. And now we're going to talk about Part 2. In Part 2, you have to speak on a topic given by examiner. You'll be given a card with various questions, and then you have to prepare for 1 minute and take notes before start speaking. Once 1 minute is up, you'll introduce your topic and you'll speak for 2 minutes until the examiner will ask you to stop. So make sure you speak as much as possible and don't end your speaking until the examiner asks you to do so. Remember, introducing your topic is very important because it will help your examiner follow your ideas and know what you're going to talk about. So, for example, you can begin your speech by saying something like this: I'm going to talk about, or I'm going to discuss about. So, make sure you introduce your topic using such words. And also keep in mind, using transition words are very important. Transition words we have such as first of all, however, for example, finally, and so on. So make sure you're using them because that will help your examiner to understand your ideas better, and also that will help him to follow them better as well. Also important point here to remember is that you need to talk a lot and you need to make sure you are speaking spontaneously. So you are not memorizing some specific sentences or vocabulary words, but using your own words. And now we are going to discuss our Part 2 example prompt. As you remember, in Part 2 you'll be given candidate task card. You'll be asked to do the following as an example we have on the slide. Describe something you own which is very important to you. You should say where you got it from, how long you have had it, what you use it for, and explain what is important, why it is important to you. So when you have a task like this, you'll have 1 minute to prepare before you speak. And then once 1 minute is up, examiner will ask you to start speaking. So you'll have 2 minutes to speak and show your ability of speaking English. So you should try to speak as much as possible, and it's very important point to remember that you should answer all the questions that are presented in the card, such as where you got the gift or the things that you possess that is important to you, how long you have had it, so present a number, maybe 2 months, maybe 5 years, and what you use it for. So give an example and explain what you use it for, and of course give some reasons why this is an important thing to you. Once you're done speaking, you will have some rounding off questions that examiner will ask you about the topic you talked. So they might sound like this: is it valuable in terms of money, and would it be easy to replace? So remember that you should not give yes or no, I don't know, maybe kind of answers, and you should speak in 2-3 complete sentences. And now let's take a look how to take notes. For example, you'll have a candidate card that will ask you to do the following: describe a trip you have taken recently. You should say where you went, who went with you, and why you went there. So when you're taking your notes, make sure you are not writing complete sentences. You only write down a couple of words that will help you to remember your ideas fast. So for example, where, you can write down something like about 40 kilometers from home, and who, my entire family, why, visit to our grandparents. So remember, you shouldn't write complete sentences because while speaking and when you try to read them, you'll get more confused. So you only need to see the words, the keywords that will help you to remember your ideas and continue to speak about your topic. So taking notes should be real fast, and you have to make sure you are covering the most important points like where, who, and why. Now we're going to discuss about personal feelings. Showing your personal feelings is very important during your part 2. And remember, in the last part of the part 2, you'll be asked to explain something about your personal feelings about the topic. For example, why it is important to you, or why you like it, or maybe why you dislike it. So the main strategy here is to think of 3 logical responses to the questions, then say a couple of sentences about each one. So for example, you have a reason 1, why you like it, then you present supporting details and show an example. And remember, do not memorize your response. You should try to talk naturally as much as possible and try not to be nervous. And here we have example of students' response for the part 2. Read carefully, and this will give you an idea how to respond to this type of task. Ielts Speaking Strategies and Tips, Part 3. Now we are going to talk about our Part 3, which is going to be about conversation on abstract topics. Remember, the examiner might ask you a few questions on a topic from Part 2. If there is time left, then she or he will make a transition to Part 3. The purpose of Part 3 is to get your opinion on abstract topics related to the Part 2. So for example, you'll have some personal questions in Part 2, such as describing your favorite holiday. Then the examiner might have a transition by saying the following sentences. You've just talked about holidays. Now I'd like to discuss this topic more generally. First, let's talk about the importance of observing holidays. So that's how he or she will make a transition to your Part 3. In Part 3, you'll have abstract questions. They might sound like this one. Do you think that it's important to observe holidays? So remember, more you speak, less questions you get, so try to speak as much as possible and answer in complete 2-3 sentences. So try not to say yes or no. Remember, more you say yes or no, more questions you are going to receive. And if you feel confident to speak about certain topics, you can show your opinion, you can present your examples and maybe some experiences or reasons you have. So your abstract questions are going to be more specific and they are going to be related to your part 2. And now we are going to discuss about clarification. Sometimes you might hear some questions during your speaking test, but you might not be able to understand them. So that's a good idea to clarify the questions that the examiner asks. Remember, you should always directly answer a question. However, if you are not sure you understand the question, ask for clarification. Don't give an answer that is not relevant to the question. Sometimes students, even though they do not understand the question, they still speak about something different. So make sure you don't make the same mistake and you ask for clarification. Asking for clarification also gives you extra time to think of a good answer. So this is a very helpful tool to brainstorm and think about a better response. When you're asking for clarification, you can use the following phrases you have in the box. So these are common phrases to ask for clarification, such as, do you mean, do you want me to say, if I understand you correctly, you want to know, and continue your idea. You're asking me if, and you would like me to give you. So these are the type of phrases you can use for clarification. And remember, you do not need to remember them all. You just have to remember a couple of them, like 2 or 3, if you'd like to, and try to practice asking questions for clarifications. This will help you a lot during your IELTS speaking test. And now we're going to review our important speaking tips that can help you during your speaking test. The first one and the most important one is keep talking, because the examiner needs to hear you use English, so please do not be shy and show your ability of speaking English for a longer period of time. Avoid giving yes, no type of answers. Speak as much as possible in 2-3 sentences. Give 2-3 sentence type of response. And it's also important to keep in mind that everyone makes mistakes, and even native speakers make some grammatical mistakes. If you make some of them, it's totally fine. Just try not to dwell on that and worry about it too much, and just let it go and continue speaking as much as you can. Another important point to keep in mind is that you should not memorize responses. You need to sound spontaneous, natural, even though you make some little errors. So it's totally fine, but try not to memorize some responses that you find online or some specific phrases. It can confuse you even more in time of speaking. Also, don't worry about a particular part. For example, you remember we have part 1, part 2, part 3. Remember that your score is a composite of all 3 parts, not just one. So even though you don't, for example, you didn't do well on the part 1, always try to do better in the next part, okay? And also keep in mind about your preparation time. In part 2, you'll be given 1 minute, so make sure you read your card, you prepare yourself, and you think about what to say during that time. So this is very important. Sometimes students come to the test, they are given 1 minute, and they look at the questions they have just for maybe 5 seconds, and they say, I'm ready. But you should actually take advantage of the time you have, prepare very well, and then speak for 2 minutes non-stop. And again, don't worry if the examiner stops you, because each part has a time limit. So if examiner stops you, it doesn't mean that you did something wrong or something went not well. It's totally fine. Just move on to the next part. And again, be enthusiastic, show your positivity. And I'm sure if you show your interest and you speak a lot, you are going to do very well on this part of the test. And now we are going to review our final slide, which is going to be a recap to the things we studied today. As you remember, you'll have 3 parts to complete your speaking section, and you'll be given 11 to 14 minutes. Remember, more you speak, longer your test is going to take. Less you speak, shorter the test is going to be. In your part 1, you'll have 4 to 5 minutes to speak, and your preparation time is going to be none, so it means you won't have any time to prepare. It's going to be an interview type of task. And task 2 is going to be 3 minutes, so you'll have 1 minute to prepare and 2 minutes to speak. Part 3 is going to be 4 to 5 minutes, and you'll have no preparation time. Most of the time it's a follow-up questions about your part 2. So that's what we have for our Ielts speaking. And you just have to keep in mind to be spontaneous and sound natural.